walked up to this house and I knocked on the door and this old man answered and he asked him, like, did you get the postcard? And he's like, oh, let me ask my wife. So he just took the clipboard from me and went inside and I was like, okay, see ya. And he came back like 5 minutes later and she comes out with the clipboard and she's like, oh, hi, my name's Marge. So that's kind of how the conversation started.
Yeah, and so then we just, we asked her, what does being perfect mean to you? And it was the typical, like, oh, I gotta do this and that and kind of work my way there, And we shared the message of the gospel, that we're saved, by grace through faith. And she just kept saying, like, but I have to work. She's like, there's something I have to do. Like, I have to work. It wouldn't be fair for one person to just be like, oh God, I'm sorry, and like go into heaven, and one person do all these things and go to the same place. And so we shared a lot of scripture with her. Like, I shared the parable of when Jesus was like hiring the different workers to go out into the field at like different times of the day. I don't know, I just feel like that one came to me and like illustrated that point. And she was just like, oh, well, there's different like interpretations of that story. And then
so I guess she couldn't really grasp sin, like how some people could be like, oh, I'm sorry, and get forgiven without having to work for it, like she'd been doing all her life. And so that was hard for her. And she said, was talking about more serious sins like murder and adultery. So I took her to the Sermon on the Mount and said, anyone who hates his brother or sister is a murderer. And she said, well, I agree with that. But she kept going back to serious sins and getting rebaptized and all this stuff. And so then I asked her something and I was like happy about it because it actually made her stop. And so I said to her, like, you agree with me, everyone's sinful. And she's like, well, of course everyone's sinful. And I said, okay. So how can you trust like all these revelations and prophecies of these prophets when they're sinful human beings just like us? And she was like, well, I don't know. And I was like, yeah, I know. So
it was pretty cool.
Yeah, so we went through the Ephesians 2, and she was like, well, that's the wrong translation, just going back and forth with this. It's the wrong interpretation. We don't believe that translation, but we still use the Book of Mormon in the Bible, just not that way. So
and then everyone brought up it was like, oh, we don't use that. We don't use that. And
yeah.
So you don't use anything that has to do with grace, which is really the whole message of the Bible.
Yeah. So we kind of went through that whole conversation. Then we were like, okay, bye. So
it was good though.
It was good.
She was.
It was for a while, probably like 30, 35 minutes. And we were sitting down like on the grass, like outside the house, and he comes back out and he's like, girls, she wants you to come back. We're like, okay. So Mark and Lily, who were down the street, were like following behind us. So they just were kind of waiting outside, and then they come up too. And she gave us brownies and water and was like, come in. Well, we didn't go inside, but we talked on the steps. Talked about heaven and the kingdoms. And you said something. She said, well, I'll pull you right up to the celestial kingdom with me or something.
Yeah, we asked her, like, you asked her, where are we going to end up, and she was like, well, I'll bring you right up to the celestial with me. And then, so you were like, well, are we both going to be in the celestial? And then, as Mark was sharing more about, like, the message of faith and grace, and that's how we get to heaven, she was like, well, you're not going to make celestial if you keep that up. And we just, like, started laughing. It was really funny. That's when it got very serious, though. Like, it was very lighthearted, and then it was, like, as Mark kind of pushed, like, well, no, this is actually, like, kind of a serious thing. Like, if what you're saying is true, I'm not going to be there with you. Mm-hmm. And if what I'm saying is true, like, you're not going to be there with me. And that's when she just got very serious and was like, well, you are not getting past my testimony. I have a strong testimony in the Church of Jesus Christ, Latter-day Saints. And it got like very dark and it was very like solemn in that moment. That's kind of like how we left it.
Yeah, she was a proud LDS member. She had 5 kids, 30 grandkids, and 60 great-grandkids. Like, and she's like, yep, they're all part of the LDS. And it was like, we were counting up, we're like, that's like 100 people that are like in the LDS because of like these 2 people. It was like crazy to me how much now all of those people have that same influence from their grandparents. So yeah.
But it just really, what stuck out to me was just like that pride of just her, like, I have to work, I have to do something. And I think that we find that in all of us, like it's easy to be like, oh, well, we're grace. We're like, it's hard for us to understand that message too. We feel like we need to do something to prove ourselves to God or to like qualify for His grace, I think just as much as anyone. But that really like struck me of she just couldn't get past that. Like, there's gotta be something I have to do.
So that's Marge.